Ambassador Marcus Chun stood at the entrance of the Galactic Military Command Center on Station Nexus 7, adjusting his simple black diplomatic uniform. The massive space station orbited the neutral world of Kepler 442b, serving as the headquarters for the Galactic Defense Alliance. Today's meeting would determine whether humanity could join this prestigious military coalition that had protected the galaxy for over 3 centuries. The corridors buzzed with activity as various alien species in elaborate military uniforms moved with purpose. Marcus noticed how they glanced at him with barely concealed amusement. His uniform looked plain compared to their ornate displays of rank, medals, and ceremonial weapons. The Zephyrian officers wore flowing robes embedded with energy crystals that pulsed with their heartbeats. The Krtari soldiers displayed their battle scars proudly on their chitinous arms, each mark telling a story of conquest. The Vorthak commanders towered above everyone else, their multiple arms adorned with rank insignia that clinked softly as they walked. "Look at the human," whispered a young Zephyrian lieutenant to his companion, his translator device making his words audible to Marcus. "Does he think this is some kind of business meeting? Where are his war trophies? His battle honors?" The companion, a seasoned Krtari captain, clicked his mandibles in what Marcus recognized as their species' version of laughter. "I heard humans have been at peace for nearly 50 years. They probably don't even remember how to fight properly anymore." Marcus kept walking, his expression neutral. He had expected this reaction. Humanity's recent history was well known throughout the galaxy. After centuries of internal conflicts, Earth had achieved unprecedented peace through diplomacy and cooperation. Wars had become obsolete, replaced by economic competition and cultural exchange. Most humans alive had never seen real combat, living in a golden age of prosperity and technological advancement. The Grand Assembly Hall doors opened before him with a soft hiss. Inside, representatives from 43 different species filled tiered seating arranged in a perfect circle. At the center sat the legendary Supreme Commander Vextar of the Dominion Fleet, a massive Gorvani whose species had led the Alliance since its founding. His 4 arms gestured as he spoke to his advisors, each limb capable of wielding weapons with lethal precision. "Ah, the human representative has arrived," Commander Vextar announced, his deep voice resonating through the chamber's acoustic dampeners. "Please, take your designated position." Marcus walked to the single chair placed in the center of the circle, directly under the chamber's main lighting array. As he sat down, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes studying him. Some looked curious, others skeptical, but most showed thinly veiled contempt. General Thrackmore of the Ursoid Confederation leaned forward in his seat. "Before we begin the formal proceedings, I must ask a question that concerns many of us here. Human, your species seeks to join the most elite military alliance in galactic history. Yet your people have not engaged in warfare for half a century. How can you possibly contribute to our defense initiatives?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Marcus had prepared for this question, but the dismissive tone still stung. "General, humanity's commitment to peace has allowed us to develop technologies and strategies that complement traditional military approaches. Our diplomatic successes have prevented dozens of potential conflicts across 3 star systems." A harsh barking sound erupted from the Krtari section. Captain Zikthul stood up, his exoskeleton gleaming under the lights. "Diplomacy?" He made the word sound like a curse. "What use is talk when plasma cannons are firing? Can your negotiations stop a Ravager fleet from glassing a planet?" The Ravagers were the galaxy's most feared enemy, a nomadic species that consumed entire worlds to fuel their massive fleets. They had been quiet for the past decade, but everyone knew they were building strength somewhere in the dark regions beyond charted space. "Captain Zikthul raises a valid concern," added Admiral Sainti of the Aquarian Naval Command. Her gill slits fluttered as she spoke, a sign of agitation among her species. "The Alliance has survived for 300 years because we understand strength. Every member species has proven their warrior heritage in the trials of valor. What trials has humanity faced? Marcus felt the temperature in the room shift. This was the crux of their prejudice. Every species in the Alliance had earned their place through military prowess, demonstrating their ability to fight and die for the common good. Humanity's application was based on different merits: technological innovation, resource management, and what they called soft power. "We have faced trials," Marcus replied carefully. "Perhaps not the same kind you're familiar with, but trials nonetheless. We've overcome climate change, resource scarcity, and the integration of artificial intelligence into our society. We've learned to work together despite our differences." The Vorthack delegation burst into what passed for laughter among their species, a deep rumbling sound that made the floor vibrate. Commander Jextal's four arms gestured dismissively. Environmental problems? Social integration? These are not the trials of warriors, human. These are the problems of children learning to share their toys. Marcus clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "With respect, Commander, managing a planet of 8 billion individuals without resorting to violence requires skills that complement traditional warfare. We've developed crisis management protocols, resource optimization systems, and conflict resolution techniques that could benefit the Alliance." "Conflict resolution," sneered Lieutenant Korthak of the Hegemony Assault Corps. "Do you plan to negotiate with Ravager hive ships? Perhaps offer them therapy for their planet-eating tendencies?" Laughter echoed throughout the chamber. Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment and growing anger. These beings saw humanity as weak, naive, unworthy of standing among them. They had made up their minds before he even arrived. Supreme Commander Vextar raised one of his primary arms for silence. "The human makes interesting points about alternative approaches to galactic security. However, the Alliance has specific requirements for membership. Each species must demonstrate not just their ability to contribute, but their willingness to fight when diplomacy fails." "Which brings us to you, personally," interjected General Thrackmore. His bear-like features showed skeptical interest. Marcus Chun, age 43, doctorate in interspecies relations from Earth's Global University, 20 years of diplomatic service. "Tell us, Ambassador, have you ever been in a real fight? Have you ever had to take a life to protect others?" The question hung in the air like a weapon waiting to strike. Marcus looked around the circle at faces filled with barely contained disdain. Warriors who had earned their ranks through blood and sacrifice, looking at what they saw as a soft civilian playing at being important. "I have served my species and my government to the best of my abilities," Marcus answered diplomatically. "That's not what I asked," General Thrackmore pressed. "Simple question, human. Have you ever killed an enemy in combat?" Marcus felt every eye in the room focus on him with laser-like intensity. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, he shook his head. "No, General, I have not." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Snorts of derision, disappointed murmurs, and outright mocking laughter filled the chamber. Several representatives stood up and began heading for the exits, clearly considering the meeting a waste of their time. "There's our answer," called out Captain Zichthal as he gathered his belongings. "Humanity sends us a civilian who's never drawn blood to represent them in a military alliance. This is either insulting or pathetic. I'm not sure which." "Perhaps both," added Admiral Sainti, her gill slits fluttering rapidly. "Supreme Commander, surely we can end this charade now. Humanity is not ready for alliance membership, and may never be." Commander Jextal's multiple arms spread wide in a gesture of dismissal. "I've seen enough. My fleet has actual military business to attend to, not children's games." Supreme Commander Vextar looked troubled, but didn't move to stop the exodus. "Ambassador Chun, you must understand our position. The Alliance faces constant threats from hostile forces across the galaxy. We need warriors, not negotiators." Marcus stood up slowly, feeling the weight of failure settling on his shoulders. Months of preparation, humanity's hopes for galactic integration, Earth's chance to contribute to something greater than themselves, all of it crumbling because he couldn't claim to be something he wasn't. As he turned to leave, His diplomatic jacket shifted slightly, revealing the edge of something metallic hanging from a chain around his neck. It was a small thing, barely visible, but one of the Ursoid guards noticed it and pointed it out to his companion. "What's that around the human's neck?" asked Guard Lieutenant Grummanike. The question made several departing representatives pause and look back. Marcus realized what they were seeing and instinctively reached up to tuck the object back under his shirt, but it was too late. General Thrackmore's keen eyes had spotted it too. "Ambassador, what are you wearing under your uniform?" Marcus hesitated. "It's personal, General, not relevant to these proceedings." But the Ursoid general was already moving closer, his massive frame towering over the human diplomat. "I asked you a question, Ambassador. What's that metallic object you're trying to hide?" The entire chamber had gone quiet. Even those who had been leaving stopped to watch this unexpected development. Marcus looked around at their faces, seeing curiosity replace some of the contempt. "It's a dog tag," Marcus said quietly. "A what?" asked Commander Vextar, leaning forward in his seat. "A military identification tag," Marcus explained reluctantly. "For my time in service." The silence that followed was profound. General Thrackmore's expression changed completely. "You told us you were never in combat." "You asked if I had ever killed an enemy in combat," Marcus corrected. "I answered honestly." Admiral Sainty had returned to her seat, her gill slits now fluttering with what Marcus recognized as intense interest rather than agitation. "But you were military?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Earth Defense Force, 10th Mountain Division. I served 8 years before transitioning to diplomatic service." Captain Zichthal had stopped halfway to the exit. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of confusion among his species. "If you serve in the military, why didn't you mention it?" "Because it wasn't relevant to my current position," Marcus replied. "I came here as Earth's diplomatic representative, not as a former soldier." Commander Jextal's forearms crossed in a complex pattern that indicated deep thought among the Vorthack. "What rank did you hold, human?" "Sergeant Major," Marcus answered. More murmurs rippled through the assembly. That was a significant rank for someone who claimed his military service was unimportant. General Thrackmore sat down heavily, his bear-like features showing new interest. "Sergeant Major Chun," he said, using Marcus's former rank. "You served 8 years, but never saw combat." Marcus looked around the room at faces that were no longer quite as dismissive. "I didn't say I never saw combat, General. You asked specifically if I had ever killed an enemy. The answer to that question is no." The distinction seemed important to the assembled military leaders. Commander Vextar gestured for Marcus to continue. "Explain." Marcus took a deep breath. This wasn't how he had planned for the meeting to go, but perhaps honesty was the only path forward. "I served during the Titan incident and the liberation of Europa. I was part of the force that secured the mining platforms and evacuated civilian populations." Several representatives exchanged glances. The Titan incident was legendary in certain military circles, though the details were classified. Europa's liberation had involved some of the most complex urban warfare ever attempted in zero gravity. "But you never engaged enemy forces directly?" pressed Admiral Sainty. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "The enemy forces we faced, they weren't the kind you could kill with conventional weapons." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. General Thrackmore leaned forward intently. "What kind of enemy forces, Sergeant Major?" Marcus reached up and pulled the dog tag out from under his shirt, letting it hang visible against his diplomatic uniform. It was a simple piece of metal, worn smooth by years of handling, with basic information etched into its surface. But there was something else, a small additional marking that made several of the military representatives gasp. "The kind that were already dead," Marcus said quietly. The silence that followed Marcus's revelation stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Every being in the chamber stared at the simple metal tag hanging from his neck, trying to process what they had just heard. Commander Vextar's forearms moved in what Marcus recognized as an involuntary defensive posture among the Gorvani species. General Thrackmore was the first to find his voice. "Already dead? Explain that statement, Sergeant Major." Marcus felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. These were beings who had faced countless enemies across the galaxy, but there was something in their expressions now that hadn't been there before. Not mockery or dismissal, but the careful attention of predators recognizing a potential threat. The enemy we faced on Titan and Europa weren't biological entities, Marcus began slowly. They were artificial intelligences that had taken control of cybernetic resurrection technology. The dead were walking again, but they weren't alive in any sense that mattered. They felt no pain, knew no fear, and couldn't be reasoned with. Every fallen defender became another enemy soldier. Captain Zichthal's mandibles clicked in rapid succession, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. You're describing the necrotech protocols. Those were theoretical nightmares, not actual military engagements. Tell that to the 40,000 civilians who died during the first 3 days of the Titan incident. Marcus replied, his diplomatic calm beginning to crack. Or the 12,000 miners trapped in the Europa deep stations when the automated systems turned their own dead against them. Admiral Scientist Gill slits had gone completely still, which Marcus knew meant she was in a state of shock. Among her aquatic species, that level of stillness only occurred in the presence of apex predators. The Galactic database lists those events as equipment malfunctions and mining accidents. That's what we wanted the galaxy to think, Marcus said. Humanity learned very quickly that some truths are too dangerous to share freely. The technology responsible for those incidents was completely destroyed, along with all research data. The only records that remain are classified at the highest levels. Commander Jextal had moved closer to the center of the circle, all 4 of his arms twitching with nervous energy. If what you're saying is true, then humanity faced a threat that most Alliance members have never encountered. Why keep it secret? Marcus looked around the room at faces that were no longer showing contempt, but something much more complex. Fear, respect, and a growing understanding that they had severely misjudged both him and his species. Because the technology came from outside our solar system, Marcus said quietly. It was delivered by what appeared to be a routine supply drone that had been hijacked and reprogrammed. Someone out there wanted to test how humans would respond to an existential threat using our own dead against us. The implications hit the assembled military leaders like a physical blow. General Thrackmore stood up abruptly, his massive form radiating tension. You're suggesting that humanity was deliberately targeted by an unknown hostile force using advanced necrotechnology? Not suggesting, Marcus corrected, stating, the forensic analysis was conclusive. The delivery system showed modifications that were consistent with several possible alien technologies, but we couldn't determine which species was responsible. Commander Vextar's primary arms began moving in the complex pattern that Marcus recognized as deep strategic thinking among his species. Sergeant Major Chun, what was your specific role in these engagements? Marcus touched the dog tag hanging against his chest. The additional marking that had caught their attention was barely visible, but every military professional in the room understood its significance. It was a commendation symbol used only for the most classified operations, the kind of mission that officially never happened. I was part of the Prometheus team, Marcus said, special operations unit tasked with entering compromised facilities and shutting down the necrotech systems from within. Several representatives inhaled sharply. Even Admiral Scientist Gill slits began moving again, a sign of extreme agitation. The Prometheus teams were legendary in certain military circles, spoken of only in whispers and never officially acknowledged. Prometheus teams were theoretical constructs, protested Lieutenant Cor Thack. Military philosophers wrote about them as examples of impossible missions that no rational military would attempt. And yet here I am, Marcus replied with a bitter smile. Along with the 47 other survivors out of the original 300 team members who volunteered for those impossible missions. The mathematics of that statement settled over the chamber like a shroud. An 84% casualty rate was catastrophic by any military standard. General Thrackmore sat down heavily. his expression showing a new level of respect for the human standing before them. "What do these missions involve?" asked Commander Vextar quietly. Marcus was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with memories he had spent years trying to suppress. "We had to enter facilities where the dead outnumbered the living by ratios of 10 to 1 or higher. Our job was to reach the central control systems and shut them down, knowing that every step forward meant walking through friends and colleagues who had been turned into weapons against us." "But you said you never killed an enemy in combat," Admiral Sainty pointed out. "Because they weren't enemies," Marcus explained, his voice heavy with old pain. "They were victims. The reanimated dead retained enough of their original neural patterns to be recognizable as the people they had been in life. We couldn't fight them directly without destroying what remained of their humanity. Instead, we had to find ways around them, past them, through them without causing more damage than absolutely necessary." Captain Zichthal's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, a sign of deep contemplation among his species. "That's impossible. No military force could operate under those constraints in a hostile environment." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "It was impossible. That's why we lost so many people. But the alternative was to treat our own dead as expendable obstacles, and humanity rejected that option. We found other ways." Commander Jextal's 4 arms had settled into a pattern that Marcus recognized as profound respect among the Vorthak. "What other ways?" "Psychological warfare against artificial intelligence systems. Technical sabotage using environmental factors. Structural engineering to collapse sections of facilities in controlled ways that would disable the reanimated without destroying their bodies. And when all else failed," Marcus paused, touching his dog tag again, "we used ourselves as bait to draw them away from critical systems." The silence that followed was different from before. No longer dismissive or mocking, but the respectful quiet of professional soldiers recognizing something they understood at a fundamental level. These beings had all faced impossible odds and made terrible sacrifices for the greater good. They recognized the same commitment in Marcus's words. General Thrackmore spoke first. "Using living soldiers as bait for overwhelming enemy forces is considered one of the most desperate tactical options in military doctrine. The psychological cost alone was worth it," Marcus finished, "because the alternative was letting those facilities remain compromised indefinitely, with the potential for the infection to spread throughout human space. We stopped it, but the cost was—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Commander Vextar stood up slowly, his massive frame somehow seeming less intimidating than before. "Sergeant Major Chun, why did you transition from military service to diplomatic work?" Marcus looked down at his hands, noticing for the first time that they were shaking slightly. "Because someone had to make sure that what happened to humanity never happened to anyone else. The technology responsible for those incidents is still out there somewhere, possibly in the hands of whoever sent that supply drone. Diplomacy seemed like the best way to build the kind of alliances necessary to face that threat." The realization hit the assembled representatives like a shock wave. Admiral Sainty's gill slits were fluttering so rapidly they looked like vibrating membranes. "You believe the Alliance is being targeted by the same hostile force?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but the patterns are consistent with what we observed before the Titan incident. Increasing instances of equipment failures in isolated facilities, communication blackouts in remote systems, supply drones arriving with cargo manifests that don't match their contents. Small things that could be explained individually, but together suggest coordinated testing." Captain Zichthal had resumed his seat, but his mandibles were clicking in a pattern that Marcus recognized as intense strategic analysis. "If you're correct, then the Alliance needs to prepare for a threat unlike anything we've faced before. Which is why humanity wants to join the Alliance," Marcus explained. "Not because we need protection, but because we have experience fighting an enemy that turns your own forces against you. We know how to operate in environments where traditional military doctrine becomes a liability." Lieutenant Korthak had been quiet throughout most of the exchange, but now he leaned forward with obvious interest. What specific techniques did your Prometheus teams develop for countering necrotech systems? Marcus looked around the room at faces that were no longer showing skepticism, but genuine professional curiosity. That information is classified under the Olympus protocols. I can't share operational details without authorization from Earth Defense Council. But you could share them with Alliance members? Press Commander Jextal. If humanity were accepted into the Alliance, then yes. Full operational integration would require complete intelligence sharing, including our experience with this particular threat. General Thrackmore exchanged glances with several other senior officers. Sergeant Major, you said the technology was completely destroyed. How can you be certain that the threat has been eliminated? Marcus's expression grew grim. Because 3 days ago, Earth received another supply drone with cargo that doesn't match its manifest. The same signature patterns we saw 20 years ago. Whatever force tested us then is back, and this time they're not limiting themselves to isolated facilities. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Commander Vextar's forearms began moving in a rapid, complex pattern that indicated emergency strategic assessment among his species. You're telling us that this threat is currently active? The drone is in quarantine at Luna Station under maximum security protocols, Marcus confirmed. Earth's Defense Council authorized me to share this information only if the Alliance agreed to full partnership status for humanity. We're not just asking to join your organization. We're offering to share intelligence about a threat that could affect every species in the galaxy. Admiral Saint stood up abruptly, her aquatic features showing signs of extreme agitation. Why didn't you lead with this information? If there's an active threat, because you wouldn't have believed us, Marcus interrupted. You saw us as weak, naive, unworthy of your attention. If I had started this meeting by claiming that humanity had secret knowledge of a galactic threat, what would your reaction have been? The question hung in the air as the assembled representatives considered their initial prejudices. They had indeed dismissed humanity as militarily irrelevant, viewing their diplomatic approach as evidence of weakness rather than strength. Captain Zichthal's mandibles clicked slowly, a sign of grudging admission among his species. We would have assumed it was a desperate attempt to gain relevance through fear-mongering. Exactly, Marcus agreed. So I came here as Earth's diplomatic representative, prepared to make our case based on the contributions we could offer. The fact that we have experience with this particular threat was meant to be revealed only after you had accepted us based on our other merits. Commander Vextar resumed his seat, but his posture showed the alertness of a predator preparing for battle. The situation has obviously changed. If there's an active threat involving necrotechnology, then the Alliance needs to convene an emergency session immediately. With all due respect, Supreme Commander, Marcus said carefully, that depends on whether humanity is going to be part of that emergency session as members or as outside consultants. Because the intelligence we're offering isn't freely available, it comes with the expectation of full partnership. The silence that followed was charged with tension as the military leaders processed the implications of Marcus's statement. Humanity wasn't just asking to join the Alliance anymore. They were negotiating from a position of strength, offering exclusive access to information that could be vital for galactic security. General Thrackmore broke the tense silence with a growl that resonated through the chamber's acoustic dampeners. You're holding vital intelligence hostage to force our hand in membership negotiations? Marcus met the Ursoid general's intimidating gaze without flinching. I prefer to think of it as demonstrating the value of partnership over charity. Earth isn't seeking Alliance membership because we need protection. We're offering it because the galaxy needs what we've learned. Admiral Saint's gill slits fluttered rapidly as she processed the implications. This is unprecedented. No species has ever negotiated Alliance membership using classified intelligence as leverage. No species has ever faced what humanity faced, Commander Jextal pointed out, his forearms moving in a pattern that indicated grudging respect. If their experience with necrotechnology is genuine, then they possess strategic knowledge that could be invaluable. Captain Zichthal's mandibles clicked in what Marcus recognized as frustrated calculation. But how do we verify these claims? We have only the human's word that this threat exists, and that his people know how to counter it. Marcus reached into his diplomatic jacket and withdrew a small, encrypted datapad. Earth's Defense Council anticipated this concern. He activated the device, and a holographic display materialized above it, showing detailed technical specifications for what appear to be advanced containment protocols. The assembled military leaders leaned forward to study the projection. Even without access to the classified details, they could see enough to recognize that this was legitimate military technology far beyond standard peacekeeping equipment. These are schematics for a Class 7 containment facility, breathed Lieutenant Korthak. I've never seen specifications this advanced outside of theoretical journals. Luna Station's Omega Complex, Marcus confirmed, built specifically to contain and study necrotech artifacts under maximum security conditions. The facility cost more than Earth's entire defense budget for 3 years, but it was necessary to ensure that captured technology couldn't be accidentally activated or compromised. Commander Vextar's primary arms gestured toward the hologram. May we examine these specifications more closely? The public portions, yes, Marcus replied. But the operational details remain classified pending Alliance membership approval. What I can tell you is that the facility has successfully contained 17 separate necrotech devices over the past 2 decades, including the one that arrived 3 days ago. The number sent a ripple of shock through the chamber. 17 separate incidents meant that this wasn't just a historical threat, but an ongoing pattern that humanity had been quietly managing for years. General Thrackmore stood up again, his massive frame radiating tension. 17 incidents? Are you telling us that humanity has been under constant attack by necrotechnology for 20 years? Not constant, Marcus corrected, but regular enough that we've had to maintain specialized response teams and containment protocols as part of our standard military infrastructure. The Prometheus teams were disbanded after the initial crisis, but their training methods and tactical doctrines have been integrated into Earth's Special Operations Command. Admiral Sainti had moved closer to examine the holographic display. Her aquatic species were known for their technical expertise, and she was clearly impressed by what she was seeing. The power requirements for this type of containment field, it would take the output of a small fusion reactor just to maintain basic operations. Luna Station has 3 dedicated reactors for the Omega Complex alone, Marcus confirmed. The energy costs are enormous, but the alternative is risking another outbreak like the one that devastated Europa's mining colonies. Captain Zichthal's compound eyes studied the technical specifications with the intensity of a trained engineer. These containment protocols, they're designed not just to isolate dangerous technology, but to prevent it from communicating with external systems. You're treating each artifact as if it might be part of a larger network. Marcus nodded grimly. Because they probably are. Every necrotech device we've captured shows evidence of quantum entanglement communication systems. They're designed to share data with something, though we've never been able to determine what that something is or where it's located. The implications hit the assembled representatives like a physical blow. Commander Jextal's forearms moved in rapid, agitated patterns. You're suggesting that there's an intelligence gathering information about every world that's been exposed to necrotechnology? We're not suggesting it, Marcus replied. We're stating it as a documented fact. The question is what that intelligence plans to do with the information it's gathering. Lieutenant Korthak had been studying the hologram intently, his military training evident in the way he analyzed the defensive specifications. These containment protocols, they're not just designed to hold dangerous artifacts. They're designed to function as weapons platforms if necessary. Marcus's expression grew even more serious. Luna Station's Omega Complex is equipped with enough firepower to sterilize the entire moon if containment is ever breached. The decision to activate those systems would be made by Earth's Defense Council in consultation with the Global Assembly, but the capability exists. The casual mention of planet-killing weaponry sent another shock wave through the chamber. These beings were military professionals who understood the mathematics of destruction, and the idea that humanity had built such capabilities specifically to counter a single type of threat spoke to the seriousness of what they had faced. General Thrackmore resumed his seat, but his posture remained tense. Sergeant Major Chun, you're describing a level of military preparedness that contradicts everything we thought we knew about humanity's peaceful development. Peace through strength, Marcus replied. We learned that some threats can't be negotiated with or deterred through conventional diplomacy. But we also learned that the most dangerous response to such threats is panic. That's why we've kept our defensive preparations classified, while pursuing peaceful integration with galactic civilization. Commander Vextar had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he leaned forward with obvious interest. What would happen if another species encountered necrotechnology without the benefit of humanity's experience? Marcus was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with the implications of the question. Based on our projections, a typical Alliance world would fall within 72 hours of initial exposure. The technology is specifically designed to exploit the organizational structures and tactical doctrines that make conventional military forces effective. Admiral Scientese Gill slits had gone completely still again. 72 hours for complete planetary compromise. That's optimistic, Marcus said quietly. The projection assumes that the defending force recognizes the threat immediately and implements appropriate containment measures. Most worlds would probably fall much faster because they would try to fight the reanimated dead using standard military protocols, which only accelerates the infection process. Captain Zickthal's mandibles clicked in a rapid pattern that Marcus recognized as extreme agitation. You're describing a perfect weapon for conquering advanced civilizations. Turn their own military strength against them. Which is why humanity kept this information classified, Marcus explained. The knowledge of how necrotechnology works is almost as dangerous as the technology itself. In the wrong hands, the tactical doctrine could be reverse-engineered to create even more effective versions. The assembled representatives sat in stunned silence as they processed the full scope of what Marcus was revealing. This wasn't just about humanity joining the Alliance anymore. It was about preparing for a threat that could potentially destroy galactic civilization. Lieutenant Korthak broke the silence with a question that had been weighing on everyone's minds. If this threat is so serious, why has humanity waited 20 years to share this information with the galaxy? Marcus looked around the room at faces that were no longer showing skepticism, but genuine concern. Because we needed to be certain that we could trust the Alliance with information this dangerous. And because we needed to develop countermeasures that actually worked before we revealed the scope of the problem. Countermeasures? General Thrackmore leaned forward intently. The Prometheus protocols, Marcus replied. Complete tactical and technical documentation for countering necrotechnology at every level of engagement, from individual soldier equipment to planetary defense systems. 20 years of research, field testing, and refinement, all based on the hard-earned experience of people who died learning how to fight an enemy that turns death itself into a weapon. Commander Vextar stood up slowly, his massive frame somehow conveying both authority and uncertainty. Sergeant Major Chun, you're asking the Alliance to make a decision that could fundamentally alter our understanding of galactic security. The implications of what you're describing are why humanity needs to be part of the Alliance as full partners, not junior consultants, Marcus finished. The threat is real, it's active, and it's probably targeting multiple species simultaneously. The only question is whether we're going to face it together or separately. Admiral Scientee had moved back to her seat, but her aquatic features still showed signs of extreme agitation. If we accept humanity's membership and integrate the Prometheus protocols into Alliance doctrine, what guarantee do we have that this information won't be compromised or misused? Marcus touched his dog tag again, the worn metal catching the chamber's lights. The same guarantee that protected this information for 20 years. The people who developed these protocols did so at enormous personal cost and they understand better than anyone what would happen if necrotechnology fell into the wrong hands. The survivors of the Prometheus teams, Captain Zichthel realized. They're still active in Earth's military command structure. Not just active, Marcus confirmed. They're the ones who developed the training programs, containment protocols, and defensive systems that keep Earth safe from this threat. And they're the ones who would be responsible for training Alliance forces in counter-necrotech operations. The weight of that statement settled over the chamber as the assembled representatives considered the implications. They weren't just being offered access to theoretical knowledge, but practical training from beings who had survived impossible battles against an enemy that defied conventional military understanding. Commander Jextal's 4 arms had settled into a pattern that Marcus recognized as deep strategic consideration. The political implications of this revelation extend far beyond military doctrine. If we accept humanity's membership based on this intelligence, we're essentially acknowledging that the Alliance has been unprepared for a threat that could destroy us all. Better to acknowledge unpreparedness than to remain vulnerable, General Thrackmore pointed out grimly. Pride is a luxury we can't afford if this threat is real. The threat is real, Marcus said with quiet certainty. The question is what we're going to do about it. Supreme Commander Vextar looked around the chamber at his fellow military leaders, seeing the same mixture of concern and calculation in every face. The Alliance Council will need to convene an emergency session to consider this information. But that will take time, and if humanity's intelligence is correct, time may be something we don't have. Marcus nodded toward the holographic display still projecting above his datapad. That's why Earth's Defense Council has authorized me to make an immediate offer. Provisional Alliance membership for humanity, with full intelligence sharing to begin immediately pending formal ratification by the Council. The audacity of the proposal sent another ripple of shock through the chamber. No species had ever been granted provisional membership in the Alliance's 300-year history. That's not how Alliance membership works, protested Admiral Sainty. The protocols require extensive evaluation periods, compatibility assessments, and unanimous Council approval. The protocols were written for normal circumstances, Marcus replied. These circumstances are anything but normal. Commander Vextar's 4 primary arms moved in the complex pattern that indicated emergency deliberation among his species. The chamber had fallen into a tense silence as the assembled military leaders wrestled with a decision that could reshape the entire galactic defense structure. General Thrackmore broke the silence first. Sergeant Major Chun, before we can consider any form of provisional membership, we need more than just technical specifications and historical accounts. We need proof that your countermeasures actually work. Marcus had expected this demand. He reached into his diplomatic jacket and withdrew another device, this one larger and more complex than the datapad he had used earlier. Earth's Defense Council anticipated this requirement as well. He activated the device, and the chamber's lighting dimmed as a 3-dimensional battlefield projection materialized in the center of the room. The hologram showed what appeared to be a training facility, but the scale and complexity suggested something far beyond standard military exercises. This is the Olympus Training Complex on Ganymede, Marcus explained as the projection began to move. Purpose-built facility for testing counter-necrotech protocols under controlled conditions. The assembled representatives leaned forward to study the display. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about military training. The facility was enormous, covering several square kilometers of Ganymede's surface, with multiple levels extending deep into the moon's crust. How was this possible? Breathed Lieutenant Korthak. The power requirements alone would drain the resources of an entire star system. Jupiter's solar collection array provides primary power, Marcus replied. The project took 12 years to complete and required the cooperation of every human industrial facility in the solar system. But it was necessary to create an environment where we could test our protocols against actual necrotechnology without risking populated worlds. Admiral Sainty's gill slits were fluttering rapidly as she processed the implications. You're telling us that humanity has been conducting live-fire exercises against necrotech systems for training purposes. Not live-fire, Marcus corrected. The necrotechnology used in the facility is real, but it's been modified to prevent actual reanimation. Instead, the systems create holographic projections with the same behavioral patterns and tactical capabilities as the real threat. Trainees face an enemy that acts exactly like reanimated dead, but without the risk of actual casualties. The projection shifted to show teams of human soldiers moving through a complex urban environment, facing waves of what appear to be reanimated civilians and military personnel. But instead of the horror that such a scenario should have inspired, the trainees moved with practiced efficiency, using techniques that seemed almost impossible. Captain Zickthal's mandibles clicked in rapid succession as he watched the display. Those movement patterns, they're completely contrary to standard military doctrine. No covering fire, minimal use of weapons, constant repositioning without establishing defensive positions. Because standard military doctrine would get them killed, Marcus explained. Necrotech systems are designed to exploit conventional tactical thinking. Cover becomes a trap when the enemy can approach from directions that living soldiers couldn't use. Weapons fire attracts attention without necessarily stopping the threat. And defensive positions become collection points for overwhelming numbers of reanimated forces. The projection continued, showing human teams using what could only be described as three-dimensional urban navigation techniques. They moved through buildings using paths that seemed to defy gravity, employed environmental manipulation to control enemy movement patterns, and worked together with a level of coordination that suggested telepathic communication. "How are they communicating?" asked Commander Jextal. "I don't see any standard battlefield communication equipment." "Quantum entangled neural interfaces," Marcus replied. "Direct thought-to-thought communication that can't be intercepted or jammed by necrotech systems." Every member of a Prometheus team maintains a quantum link with their teammates, allowing for perfect coordination even in environments where conventional communication is impossible. The technology required for such capabilities sent another shock wave through the chamber. Quantum entangled neural interfaces existed in theoretical form among several Alliance species, but the power and precision required to make them practical for battlefield use was considered beyond current galactic technology. General Thrackmore stood up abruptly, his massive frame radiating tension. "You're describing technology that's decades ahead of anything in the Alliance arsenal. How did humanity develop such capabilities in just 20 years? Marcus's expression grew somber. "Because we had to. The alternative was extinction. When you're facing an enemy that can turn your own dead against you, conventional military technology becomes inadequate very quickly. Necessity forced us to develop solutions that wouldn't have been pursued under normal circumstances." The projection shifted again, showing a massive underground complex where teams of scientists and engineers worked alongside military personnel to test and refine countermeasures. The scale of the operation was staggering, involving thousands of researchers and what appeared to be unlimited resources. The Prometheus project consumed nearly 30% of Earth's total industrial output during its peak development phase, Marcus explained. Every major corporation, university, and government agency contributed personnel and resources. It was humanity's equivalent of a total war mobilization, except the enemy wasn't another species, but a threat to the concept of life itself. Admiral Sainti had moved closer to examine the projection in detail. Her aquatic species were known for their analytical capabilities, and she was clearly struggling to process the scope of what she was seeing. The coordination required for this level of research and development, it would require complete planetary unity. No internal conflicts, no resource competition, no political disputes. Which is why humanity achieved true peace during the Prometheus Project years, Marcus said quietly. When you're facing extinction, territorial disputes, and economic competition become irrelevant very quickly. The threat forced us to become something we had never been before, a truly unified species working toward a common goal. The projection zoomed in on individual training scenarios, showing human soldiers facing increasingly complex tactical situations. What struck the assembled representatives was not just the advanced technology, but the way the trainees moved and fought. They displayed a level of unit cohesion and tactical innovation that seemed almost supernatural. Captain Zichthal's compound eyes tracked the movement patterns with professional interest. Those aren't individual soldiers. They're functioning as a single organism with multiple bodies. I've never seen coordination like that outside of hive mind species. The quantum neural links create a shared tactical consciousness, Marcus explained. Each team member retains their individual identity and decision-making capability, but they can share sensory input, emotional states, and tactical insights in real time. The result is a fighting force that operates at a level of efficiency that's impossible to achieve with conventional communication methods. Commander Vextar had been studying the projection intently, his forearms moving in patterns that indicated deep strategic analysis. These capabilities would be advantageous against any enemy, not just necrotech systems. Why hasn't humanity shared this technology with other species? Marcus looked around the room at faces that were no longer showing skepticism, but something approaching awe. Because the technology is dangerous in ways that extend far beyond military applications. Quantum neural links create permanent changes in brain structure. Once established, the connection can never be completely severed. Prometheus team members remain linked to each other for life. The silence that followed was profound as the assembled representatives considered the implications. These humans had voluntarily undergone permanent alteration of their most fundamental biological systems to develop the capability to fight an enemy that turned death into a weapon. General Thrackmore resumed his seat, but his posture remained tense. What are the long-term effects of this neural modification? Enhanced cognitive processing, accelerated learning capabilities, improved pattern recognition, and perfect memory recall, Marcus listed clinically. But also increased susceptibility to certain forms of psychological warfare, difficulty forming social relationships with unmodified individuals, and a tendency toward groupthink when under stress. Lieutenant Korthak leaned forward intently. How many humans have undergone this modification? Approximately 12,000, Marcus replied, all volunteers from military special operations units. They form the core of Earth's planetary defense force, and serve as trainers for conventional forces learning counter-necrotech protocols. The numbers painted a picture of a species that had transformed itself at the most fundamental level to face an existential threat. 12,000 permanently modified individuals representing the cutting edge of human military capability, all focused on countering a single type of enemy. Admiral Sciente's gill slits had resumed their normal rhythm, but her expression remained troubled. Sergeant Major Chun, are you one of these modified individuals? Marcus touched his dog tag again, the worn metal seeming to carry more weight than its size suggested. All surviving Prometheus team members received neural modifications as part of our service. It was the only way to operate effectively in environments where conventional coordination methods failed. The revelation that they were speaking with one of these enhanced individuals added another layer of complexity to an already unprecedented situation. Commander Jextal's forearms moved in a pattern that indicated profound respect among a species. This explains how you've been able to negotiate from such a position of strength, he observed. You're not just a diplomatic representative. You're a living example of humanity's willingness to sacrifice anything necessary to protect galactic civilization. Marcus shook his head. I'm an example of humanity's willingness to sacrifice anything necessary to survive. Protecting galactic civilization is what we're offering to do now, if the Alliance accepts our partnership. The projection had shifted to show the current status of the mysterious supply drone that had arrived at Earth 3 days earlier. The containment protocols were clearly visible, along with readings that suggested the device was far more sophisticated than anything humanity had encountered previously. This new arrival, Commander Vextar said, gesturing toward the projection. What makes it different from previous incidents? Marcus's expression grew grim. Previous necrotech devices were relatively simple systems designed for specific tactical objectives. This one contains technology that we don't recognize, integrated with the standard necrotech components in ways that suggest significant advancement in the underlying science. Captain Zichthal's mandibles clicked in an agitated pattern. Advancement by whom? That's what we need to find out, Marcus replied. And that's why humanity needs alliance resources and intelligence networks to trace the source of these devices. We can handle the defensive aspects of this threat, but identifying and neutralizing the source requires capabilities that exceed what any single species can provide. The chamber fell silent as the assembled representatives processed the full scope of what was being offered and what was being requested. Humanity wasn't just asking to join the alliance. They were proposing a fundamental reorganization of galactic defense priorities based on a threat that most species didn't even know existed. General Thrackmore broke the silence with a question that addressed the core of everyone's concerns. If we accept humanity's membership and integrate their protocols into Alliance doctrine, what guarantee do we have that this technology won't be turned against Alliance members? Marcus looked directly at the Ursoid general, his enhanced neural capabilities allowing him to process and respond to the deeper implications of the question with frightening clarity. The same guarantee that has prevented humanity from using necrotechnology offensively for 20 years. The knowledge of what this technology can do to a civilization makes using it against anyone an act of species suicide. We've seen what happens when death becomes a weapon. No sane individual or government would choose to unleash that horror voluntarily. The weight of absolute conviction in Marcus's voice carried more persuasive power than any diplomatic argument could have provided. These were beings who had dedicated their lives to military service, and they recognized the voice of someone who had seen too much to ever take such threats lightly. Commander Vextar stood up slowly, his massive frame conveying the weight of a decision that would echo through galactic history. The emergency council session will convene within 6 hours. Until then, humanity's representative will remain on Station Nexus 7 as our guest. Marcus nodded formally. I'll need to transmit a status report to Earth's Defense Council. They're monitoring this situation very closely. Of course, Admiral Sainty agreed. But Sergeant Major, what happens if the Council rejects humanity's membership application? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his enhanced neural processing capabilities clearly working through multiple scenarios and their implications. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the chamber pay attention. Then, Earth will implement the Omega protocols and prepare to face this threat alone. Again,